I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Our guest, Rob Moir, has been a lifelong activist and has focused most of his years on conserving and saving Earth's waterways. Hence his organization's name, OceanRivers. In this episode of the Poetry of Predicament, Rob Moir speaks about his long history of activism, staying inspired, and his recent work with Scientists Warning. Please help me in welcoming Rob Moir.
Yeah, so I've had some tough knocks in the very beginning that, set me on this. The biggest tough knock was during the, anti-Vietnam War days, to have a draft number of 13. And so I became a conscientious objector and thought I wouldn't be able to go to college because I thought I'd be drafted, and found meaningful work as an assistant science teacher, so that which would be better than shoveling shit in Louisiana and stuff. So, adversity is what it's all about. And I remember in school being told that, we had these nuclear drills where we had to get under the desk. We were getting under the desk so that our bodies wouldn't be fused to the furniture, so that the seating plan in the metal cabinet would make sure that we all had nice burials, and this is, I was at my high school just a couple of days ago. We had a dinner seeing off the former headmistress, and I turned the corner onto this winding road that goes into the school, and I remembered how, in 1969, and I graduated in 72, I did not imagine that I'd still be alive today, because we've come through so much.
Yeah.
But that's the nature of life, is that it holds off chaos and organizes and builds despite all the entropy and chaos that's pulling around us and stuff.
All right. Well, I just as you noticed, I just happened to turn on the recording button kind of mid-sentence a few paragraphs ago.
Yeah, good.
And I'm inclined to leave it just the way it is, because I love that we just jumped right in with you, and you just were taking us through some of the quirkier moments that you can recall in terms of facing the mystery and the inherent layers of chaos in this thing we call day-to-day living that you've been engaged with now for so long. And Rob Moir, I'm just really pleased to have you here on the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And, we've been 1 degree separated for a while. You probably just didn't know that. I've been admiring the work of what I believe is just your primary organization, but I'm hoping you're going to introduce yourself and introduce the various ways that you participate and be an activist in the world pretty soon. I want to let you know that I've just been particularly connected with your work as it's gotten connected with the Scientists Warning crew with Stuart Scott. And, it's just, he's got a warm place in my heart. And, kind of by association, if nothing else, you've got a warm place as well. And I think there's a tremendous amount that we can learn from you as you tell us a little bit about the various kinds of activism and just a bit of life history that brought you to the place that you are in now, with the voice that you've got now. So just thanks for spending time, and thanks for letting those of us who might not have nearly as much activist experience, giving us just a sense of giving us a bit of orientation of what is what does the territory ahead look like? What does the territory we're in look like? Because most of us don't know what to even look for in terms of what's making a difference, what kind of changes are needed, how it's going. So again, Rob, thanks for coming. And would you mind starting with a little bit of introduction?
Absolutely. Happy to be here. I'm Rob Moir, and I'm the executive director of the OceanRiver Institute. And I'm located right here in Harvard Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I'd like to tell you a little more about that, but I'm also the director and treasurer for globalwarmingproblemsolvers.com. And that's an independent expenditure PAC located in Massachusetts that's holding politicians responsible for addressing climate change. And then, as you said, I have recently become teamed up with Stuart Scott, and am the policy and advocacy director of Scientist Warning, scientistwarning.org. And for all three of those groups, they're confronting with the biggest problem. So Scientist Warning, their role is to make known the troubling trends that scientists have come together to alert us on. And there's 7 or 8 or 9. When I tried to break down their 27 steps in their letter, and I thought it was 7 or 8, and then Bill kept adding more and more, like environmental justice and so forth. So there's a lot to do out there. And on the one hand, oh my God, but on the other hand, what a delicious challenge. You know, I don't know if you caught earlier, but I'm a mountain climber and a sailor. And so I like, you know, when you're climbing mountains, you have a big massive in front of you. We've got some masses in front of us now. And the challenge is how to break those down into doable pitches. And how can people make a difference? And the whole way it works is that we individually do what we can to better our homes and our communities, you know, try to do good. And so people ask me, you know, I don't know what to do. And my favorite answer is, well, ask the kid in your neighborhood, because they're closer to the ground and they can show you what, you know, what simple things you can do. Never mind the big things.
I love it. I love it. So, you know, I would just love it if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about your organization, because it's, at least here on the West Coast, it's a sleeper. I don't know much about it, and I'm really getting a sense that you all have far more influence than I might have imagined. And so I'd like to just hear what are you engaged with, and what's out ahead of you as an organization.
Well, I'll give you a little background before I go into the stuff we're engaged in right now. Back in 2007, the Gordon Moir Foundation wanted to support the creation of better ocean planning for Massachusetts. And so there was a bill that was being put together for ocean planning. And so Gordon Moir gave money to the Ocean Conservancy.
Well, hey there.
I don't know how that happened.
Every once in a while, something freezes. I don't either.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't have the fastest connection on the computer here.
Okay.
So let me answer that question again, I guess, from the beginning about what I got started with. So I'll just say back in 2007 and take it from there.
Great.
Okay. So back in 2007, I was employed by Ocean Conservancy, Mass Audubon, and the Conservation Law Foundation to promote a bill in Massachusetts for ocean planning. We had the problem of all these different silos of government not talking with each other. and it came to the head twice. One was they wanted to build those windmills in the middle of Nantucket Sound. And so the windmill company went to all the different agencies and said, what do you need from me in order to put stanchions and power lines and all that stuff out there on the sands of Horseshoe Shoals? And they all went like this. They pointed in other directions, you know, and so he ends up going to the agencies of least resistance, which is the last thing an entrepreneur wants to do. They want to know, what are the obstacles to know whether this is feasible or not. And the other instance was Boston Harbor is at the very head of Mass Bay. So the sandy beaches of Winthrop lose their sand and it goes muddy because it's that far up in the estuary. And so the Winthrop people are saying, please put sand back on our beach. And so finally the state sand agency came to the meeting and said, okay, we're going to put sand back on the beach and we're going to take it from over here and put it on your beach. And the state fisheries guy was in the audience and he said, you know, excuse me, but over my dead body, because the fish hatchery or the fish eggs are being deposited in that spot. And of course, Winthrop citizens wanted to stampede Beacon Hill because of incompetence of governance. So it's really important that these different agencies get it together. And so to build a constituency, I had to, you know, build a constituency. So I went around talking in the state about the importance of planning, getting people to sign on with their emails to be attached. We had different events around. And the penultimate event was, they said, oh, just rent the State House and invoice us and we'll reimburse you. So I incorporated the Ocean River Institute, so we'd have a nonprofit that could manage these things. And then they said, oh, fill it with people, because, yeah, fill it with people. And of course, as you know, field biologists, environmental people, the last thing they want to do on a nice day is be in City Hall talking to a politician. You know, it's like, no, they don't get this, you know. And so I went to their development officers, like the development officer of the Marine Biological Lab and WHOI and stuff, and said, look, you guys have people who've worked with you or support you working in Boston, and I've got a budget, so I'm paying Legal Seafood to provide clams and oysters and some chowder and have them come by. And so that's how we filled the room with the building with 47 different organizations. And then a high school student asked if he could help out. So he came up from south of Boston, Carver, Mass, which meant that he and his classmates had to find the first train in the morning into Boston. And I was there with T-shirts for them and stuff. And the New England Aquarium had loaned us a full-size right whale that we inflated. And I had to work with the traffic person for the city, who was concerned that having an inflated whale in front of City Hall would slow down traffic, and he was not too keen about that. So it comes down to your skills of working with people, because he said, well, you're in Cambridge across the Charles, just keep your damn whale over there. And I had to inform him that, no, the whale's at the aquarium, it's coming up the hill, you know. And so being able to jolly along with him made a big difference. And so the kids also had some material like whale baleen and stuff from the aquarium, and they had the petitions to sign. And darn it, they actually saw Cameron Diaz jogging down in front of Beacon Hill, and they ran the actress down and got her to sign on the policy. And the governor came down, and he rolled up his sleeve, and the New England Aquarium had a bucket with a sea urchin at the bottom of it. So he put his finger and he touched a sea urchin for the first time. And then I said, Governor, would you like a clam and an oyster? And he'd never had one. But of course, there was this whole long line of white shirt, you know, State House guys, and they weren't going to make way for the governor. But coincidentally, my son in his late 20s had just gotten his oysters and you know, 3 oysters and clams. And so he got to share those with the governor, and all the kids gathered around and stuff. And about 12 months later, the mass ocean bill became law, the ocean planning bill and stuff. And the governor wants you to know there's a little more work to it than that, but I don't think so.
Rob, can you give us just a sense of, I'm going to ask the impossible question here. There's so many different facets to this conversation and so many different issues over so many years. I just would like to get a sense of you having tracked basically the environmental movement and various actions, particularly on the East Coast for so long. How's it going? Like what sort of percentage could you say wins are happening? Something very positive in the direction that your organization is after is happening.
It's going great. You got to break the problems down, and then and you have to find doable solutions. So you can't, so I go to Washington. Oh, and so another job of mine is to create, I co-founded Ocean Champions, which is the first political 501c4 organization that holds politicians responsible for ocean legislation. We have the League of Conservation Voters, and they were looking at environment, and we had people who were good on environment and terrible on oceans. So we needed to do something just on oceans. And so I'm in touch with many of the committees in Washington. When they come up with a bill, then the OceanRiver Institute now has about 45,000 email addresses of people who have been subscribed since 2007. And I will write a letter for them to sign about why this committee should support this bill. And I ask them to make a personal comment. So about 10% of the people that I send out to will sign the letter, 1% will write a personal comment, and I work with them to make those personal comments be as effective as possible. Mm-hmm. So when I go to Washington, I'm bringing not only something doable, but I'm also giving voice to the politicians' constituents on why this should be done. Mm-hmm. And so and if it sounds like the politician's mother, all the better kind of stuff. They don't need more science. Because politics is not about science. It's not about solving problems. It's only, legislators, it's all about serving their constituents. So you don't ask a politician, what do you believe in? Do you believe in climate change? You say, by golly, I'm upset the crocuses came up 3 weeks early. And the senator will write back to you, that he bought an electric car or something, which indicates he knows what's going on. But they can only do what they can, so Scott Brown was a Republican senator from Massachusetts, mm-hmm. and he has to answer to his boss. So when I go to Washington and say, Senator, would you let the EPA regulate? He says, no, because the EPA caused the Gulf oil spill. Okay, so that's what he's been told to tell anyone like me who comes and says that. So it doesn't make any sense to, burn all your bridges. I just say, okay, how's your family? And that enables me to come back 6 months later and say, Senator, would you support an ocean trust fund, which is just like the Mass Environmental Trust Fund, and he can't say yes or no because he's got to get permission from upstairs. But he can then turn to me and say, Rob, I'm really proud that my daughter's working for the Animal Humane Society. And then when I'm on Revere Beach tabling and Senator Brown comes by, I can make him look good by saying, welcome, thank you for supporting the Ocean Environmental Trust Fund and stuff. And even though he hasn't publicly done that, he's happy, and so it all comes down to personal relationships. The combination of doing doable things. Mm-hmm. There's no way you're going to get Brown to let the EPA regulate, but that if there is a bill that doesn't have the political weight on it that those do, that's good for the ocean, he will support it.
Got it.
So, and those kinds of bills can take 6 years or more to put through.
Got it. So let's shift gears from more or less the past that you've been setting out for us, and you know,
Yeah.
telling a few of those stories from past days. What's on your screen personally these days? What are some of the bigger issues you're facing and the organization's facing? What are you
Good
up to?
question. Thank you. So the worst pollutant of oceans is nitrogen. It causes ocean dead zones, harmful algal blooms. And so for me, it's personal. Um, about 10 years ago, with the Ocean River Institute, when I was there, my son Ryan and I sailed out of the south side of Cape Cod, and halfway to Nantucket was a stanchion they put out there for the windmills. And so we were out in this 12-foot sailboat, 12 and a half foot Herreshoff, with tan bark sails and gaff rigged and no engine. So of course we get out there and the wind dies. And so the tide is pulling us to Woods Hole when I want to go north to Katuitt. And luckily I had a paddle in the boat. And so I started paddling. And when I put my hand in the water, when the water got up to my elbow, I couldn't see my fingers because there was so much blooming algae. 5 miles out, halfway to Nantucket, in the middle of Nantucket Sound. So I made it a goal. I want to be able to see my fingertips in August when the water's up to my elbow when I'm halfway to Nantucket Sound.
Yep.
And so so this harmful these algal blooms, they're not necessarily harmful, but the worst ones are. Algae needs sunlight, some warmth, and it needs nutrients. So your worst blooms are going to be in the summertime when the daylight's the longest and water's the warmest, and then they're hungry. So you got long daylight, warm waters in the tropics, but you don't have the algal blooms because there's no nutrients in the water to fuel those algae. I'm sure the algae are there, but the nutrients aren't. So the nutrients which is mostly nitrogen in salt water and phosphorus in fresh water. The nitrogen comes from septic and sewage, agriculture, and fertilizing lawns. And so people are spending lots of money to improve their septic systems, and it's to almost no avail on Cape Cod because it's all sandy soil, so it just goes through the sand and into the water and stuff. And agriculture, you've got the conservation commissioners who are making sure that stuff doesn't flow off the ag areas into the rivers and stuff, and where they are, they're fighting them and stuff. But lawns, people are paying to pollute. They're going out and buying a bag of fertilizer and literally shaking it into the water. And so when you look at the fertilizer bag, it says, and they say they've got the science behind it. Well, the science is you're supposed to fertilize on Easter, Memorial Day weekend, 4th of July, Labor Day, and in the fall. So apparently the sales couldn't wait for Columbus Day. They had to just say fall for that one and stuff. But that's five applications of 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. And if you do more than 5 applications in New England, or a little bit more than 1 pound per 1,000 square feet, it burns the grass. So the grass is literally swimming in fertilizer. And the roots don't go deep because it's swimming in fertilizer. And so 99% of that stuff isn't picked up by the grass. It's just washed away into our waterways. And so I went ashore to Barnstable is the town that Katuitt's a village in. And I got together with the Barnstable turf guy for the town of Barnstable. And we had a long talk, and he agreed that he didn't need to I just said, don't spread it during the summertime, like from June until September 30th, because the daylight's the longest, the water's the warmest, the algae is the bloomingest. I only care about the algae. and he agreed that that could be done, except it would lead to no jobs for his people. And I was polite not to remind him that that's when they're supposed to be cutting the grass, and usually fertilizing is to employ people when they're not cutting the grass. So then I said, okay, let's have a ban on fertilizing in the summertime. And they said, well, before we can do that, you have to show us the nitrogen coming off the field, coming off the lawn and polluting the water. And unfortunately, that sandy soil means you spread it over the turf, and then it's all sand, so it just goes boom right through the turf, through the sand into the groundwater. And in the groundwater, you can't tell what's nitrogen, where the nitrogen came from. So I could go nowhere. And then, so then I went to Florida, basically, because in Florida, the Indian River Lagoon is 156 miles long, and it's shallow, but there's only 6 counties around it. In Massachusetts, I had to go town to town, but in Florida, there were just 6 counties, and the dolphins were dying from skin-eating fungal infections that were related to too much algae in the water. They was really choking up and stuff. So I went down there, and we had a fundraiser in Stuart, Florida, and the head state guy who knew about dolphins dying came and spoke at our dinner. And so the next day, with some locals, I went to the centrist, because conservation commissioner of the county. So there was a green commissioner who was at our dinner, but I went to the kind of centrist guy who could get things done there and stuff, and said, look, would you, we need to stop polluting, putting nitrogen. We need to stop fertilizing in the summer. In Florida, they fertilize each season of the year, so 4 times the year. So just don't do the summer one. And because you got the most dolphins dying. So, and he said, well, Mrs. Johnson of Jupiter Island is upset about her children encountering slimy seaweed on the beach. Could he do something about that? And so I said, yes, this will fix the slimy seaweed on the beach, because they don't give a whatever about dolphins. The stupid dolphins do what they want, kind of stuff. But the grandparents are upset and stuff. So, so then he came back and said that they would not fertilize for, well, they would respect the setbacks and not fertilize from June 1st to September 30th. So that was that was a third of a year. And so we had a big celebration. And by the time I got the celebration together, the locals already had issues with this commissioner. And it's like, no, you got to appreciate what's happening. Another commissioner had been working, and then a neighboring one had been working really hard. But his problem was that there was a science institution there, and the scientists were giving him a list of things to do to be comprehensive. And that meant there were many lifts, not just 3. I was asking 3 things of the commissioner: the setback, slow release fertilizer, and the ban period. So the other guy couldn't go anywhere because he had so many things about it.
Right.
And so it took 6 years to get all but the very southern county is Palm Beach County, the wealthiest, and they have fertilizer applicators on their commission. So there's no way you could do it with them. But even then, the best way to, yeah.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, there's some dissonance, cognitive dissonance going on as I'm listening to you. I find you to be one of the most optimistic activists I've ever met. So thank you for that. That it's contagious and it's wonderful. And yet there's a part of me that comes from innumerable conversations with folks who are in similar roles out here on the West Coast or wherever I happen to bump into them. And way more often than not, the picture is not looking good, particularly in the times that we're in terms of a, well, truthfully, I heard this during the Obama administration. I know he has kind of a glow about him that some people really think there was a tremendous amount of environmental sweet spot in the Obama administration. And I think it was just the lesser of evils from all I can tell. But particularly in this administration, with their obvious intention to strip out a number of agencies, not the least of which is the EPA and Department of Interior and so on. I'm wondering, is there any darker underbelly that you could share with us, or is that just my fixation and really things are going just fine for you out there?
No, things are going lousy, but you don't get answers from presidents. It's always been grassroots. You know, the presidents, whoever they are, have to be responsible to the big bucks, you know. So everything that we've done since Earth Day 1970 has been from the grassroots up. And you're naive if you think that a green talking person like Obama is going to make a difference. No, you know, Nixon passed the EPA bill, and I don't, you know, but that's because he was pulled screaming into that kind of stuff. And so I was inspired by, you know, Dennis and Donella Meadows writing Limits to Growth. And Dennis Meadows recently was the keynote speaker at We Don't Have Time. And he put it very succinctly that if you are unable to understand the cause of a problem soon enough, it's impossible to solve it. So, you know, and so what that's what the Republicans have always done, is they deconstruct the finding out of how to solve the problem. You know, A, they take that away, and B, then they undo the regulations. So in Massachusetts, we passed a good water management bill, but the Republican governor will not staff the people who are to implement that management. So this is classic, you know, and you just have to fight it every single, you know, species, community, you know, species, population, community, ecosystem, you know, realm. You just, you know, it's very political, and you'll get further with Democrats in power than you will with, but, you know, people resist change, and so you have to break it down to understand where they're coming. You know, you can't just present the science. You've got to make it, and you've got to find out what the obstacle is. So when I go to Washington, I will meet with the legislative person that's put in charge of environment. And I'm a former science teacher. So to me, that meeting is a parent-teacher conference. And I'm learning the legislative style of the legislator. And I'm learning what are the issues that he's having to deal with his constituents. And I want the staffer to look good to his or her boss.
Yep.
So I'm not going to say fall on my sword, you know. And so different people have different strengths, you know. And so this Republican might be a sailboat racer and stuff. So first of all, I always get my meetings in Washington because they'd much rather talk about oceans and saving the land and saving the earth than war, taxes, and healthcare. But also the way I operate is I do the talking stuff or the sausage making with the legislative aid, you know, who's getting everyone's being funneled through legislative aid. So you do the science there. So when you meet the politician, it's totally social. It's because they know that I'm there to save the ocean. And what's a huge compliment is when they come through a crowd at a reception or something, because they want to talk to me because they know I'm not going to be, you know, nailing them on whatever's current, but they can tell me what they're doing to save the planet.
Right on. Right on. Well, again, thank you for that, because I've just got to call it on myself. I have kept myself away from the sausage making that you're talking about in the political process on on almost every front for most of my life. I guess I'm like many people that I am so repelled by the process that I find myself just deeply grateful that there are people like yourself who seem to really have figured out how to dance that dance and do it really well. So thank you. I'm curious if you could tell us. I'm just guessing here again, and please just set me straight. I'm guessing that this is pretty demanding work on your life energy and on your life. You know, the time and energy that it takes, and as you mentioned, the this particular administration, it's perhaps tougher than ever. I'm curious, how do you keep yourself inspired? How do you keep your energy up? How do you keep your heart open so that you can, you know, wake up and have a real life tomorrow that includes friends and family and you know, that sort of thing? How do you keep your heart open and your energy level up and your inspiration up in the face of it all?
Well, it's through the personal relationships. So I've not been going to Washington much since this new guy is in the office. Instead, you know, it's all about personal relationships. And even those, as you hear, the senators aren't Mr. Anti this or that, you know, they are real people who have kids that we can talk about, you know, and so then we can, you know, I'm very clear about what I believe in, and it's keep it focused on the environment and climate, you know, and so that's important. But it's all in the relationships. So when I was unable to do anything with stopping the nitrogen pollution in Massachusetts, um, and you know, so Falmouth had 16 striped bass dead on their shore, and so they passed a bylaw to say no fertilizing, except for 1 pound instead of 5 pounds, a slow release. And I thought, and now that was years ago, and the grass is still greener than everyone else's. So I thought the legislature couldn't do anything about this. They said the governor's got to do it. So I thought the governor could could do something about that. And no, he can't, because it would cost someone a job. So there's no way. I thought he'd be a hero. You know, saving us not have to spread on weekends. You know, what dad wants to do that, or what person wants to do that and stuff. But politically, he just couldn't do that. So I spent 2 years doing that. So one way is I have lots of different frying pans out there on the fryers, so that I haven't got all my frying eggs in one place, you know, so I'm not, but I realized, again, like I said earlier, it's never come from the top. You got to come up from the bottom. So with 2 college student interns, we wrote to there are 361 municipalities in Massachusetts, and they're all I'm concerned about their nitrogen pollution, and all of them, and phosphorus pollution. So we wrote to all of them, but the few that had followed Falmouth's lead, and said, you know, look, can you guys act locally? And so at first, only 5 responded. And it was interesting because there were towns that had the most amount of reservoir for the city drinking water in them and stuff. But that didn't really go anywhere. And then later, we had another group of interns, and we focused right around the Mystic River, where we had a big fish kill. And it was a lot of work getting through to a meeting with the conservation commissions. But we were saying, look, you guys care about clean water. Would you recommend that something be done about this? And so we have been communicating with 87 different towns. And you know, you get through the office person in the office, and then they agree to let you speak before the commission. And so out of 87 that we're communicating with, we've only had like 8 or 10 meetings, but we've discovered that, that they can rewrite the wetland laws for the properties next to it, and what's good for those laws will be good for the town. But it's retail. It's the same retail politics again, where I need to go and sit down with the commissioners and answer their questions.
Mm-hmm.
Why the grass won't die, what they're doing. And I went to Dover, Massachusetts, which is mostly lawns. It's the wealthiest town in the state, probably. And I said, look, here it is. I've got this product of slow release nitrogen, which is these little beads that release it very slowly, and it gets down into the grass so that it doesn't wash off and the roots grow deeper. And they said, I said, your hardware stores can carry it. And they said, we don't have hardware stores in Dover. And that only about 8 people in the town don't use lawn care services. And 4 of them were sitting across the table from me on the Conservation Commission. But they hadn't heard about they thought it was either organic or inorganic. Well, no, all fertilizer is just nitrogen. Some is chemically manufactured, but slow release means that it's got this polymer coating around it, and they're different size beads. So they dissolve in water at different rates, and so they can feed the lawn over 6 months. And so what happens is that as a result, the roots go much deeper, and there's stuff in the polymer that's good for the microbes in the soil. So you have healthier soil, you have healthier plants that put on more foliage. And in essence, by switching from a lot of fast release to a little bit of slow release, you are you're stopping your lawn polluting, and you're increasing your lawn's ability to fight climate change by increasing its carbon uptake and by acting as a sponge and buffer against water, extreme weather events. So if you want to fight climate change, switch, and then you can take out the patio and put a lawn in so that it's more absorbent. Take out those hard surfaces. But right now people are saying, get rid of your lawns because they pollute too much. Yeah. And that's like saying, get rid of children because there are too many marbles on the kitchen floor. You just don't give them so many marbles.
Yeah.
So this is what keeps me going, is these individual relationships. And when you run up against a wall, and man, I've smashed into them like Wile E. Coyote, like I did with for 10 years up until now on this nitrogen thing. And this is the nature of the beast, is you're going to get knocked down. So you just got to get up again and keep at it. And
right.
Yeah.
So if I may, thank you for that. That was a strong example, and it's clear that you really have a system going on, and it really is banking on your relationships not only with politicians but also with the representatives and the councils and so on of the various entities around any given body of water. If possible, I'd like to, we're kind of heading up toward the top of the hour, and before we close up this call, I'd like to just mention that you and I really connected through a recently organized Deep Adaptation forum that Professor Jim Bendell, professor of sustainability leadership in the UK, recently created this forum so that people who are basically willing to be brave enough to say, yes, it sure does look like we are facing imminent collapse of social structures, and primarily caused by human-caused climate change. And that, from my perspective, what that forum does and what that assertion does. That assertion that what we're facing, in fact, many would argue what we're in the middle of right now is a collapse of Earth and human systems. You know, and I am one of those people who sees it that way, and I see it as a long string of collapse events to come, some smaller, some larger. And what I believe that what I can keep hearing as you were describing the various kinds of relationships and how you've worked things out in various communities and so on, is I'm predicting a shift that will come either volitionally, we'll either take it on by people consciously engaging with things like this forum and engaging with conversations of how can we be with each other in a different way in the face of these collapse events going on. We'll either actively take on new ways of being, engaging with new ways of being, or we will be forced into new ways of being through our continued willful ignorance or denial, or call it what you will. And so I'm curious if you have your version of how you see this distinction of the Deep Adaptation Forum implying that what we're in now and what is coming soon is collapse of social systems. Is that true for you? And if so, how do you anticipate it changing the particularly the world that you're in?
I don't look at it like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was totally impressed by Professor Jem Bendel's approach, that he doesn't insist that you believe that the end is imminent. Instead, he makes clear that one can argue that, you know, that is a possibility, and therefore we need to find out ways to talk about how to live with that. And so that's the key, is that I have great faith in humanity. So it's against my faith to say that that we're not going to rise to the challenge somehow, and we're not going to pull off an Apollo 11 thing or whatever. I mean, gazillion of them, because people are doing stuff all over the place. So I can't give up on my faith on humanity and say that and put a number on the likelihood of catastrophe happening. Remember, I grew up with catastrophe all around us. You know, there was, you know, all kinds of threats that we've seen since the 60s. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and before it was, you know, the Cold War. And so this is, but the fascinating thing about Bendel's work is that you can put aside what percent you think is likely to the world to end or not, and instead come back to the basics of what is it that we need, you know, and what is it that we value, and what is it that when the world is crumbling around us, we're content in what we have, you know. And so, you know, it comes down to, you know, what we need to survive is, you know, food, shelter, and fellowship. And, you know, and so people, you know, need to come to grips with that, you know, this bit about, you know, loss of resources are for things that we don't really need. I mean, humanity can survive without lithium and some of these things. So there's a tendency of people to view the world as a giant pizza, and that the more people on it, the smaller their slice. And that's not productive. So I'm getting off topic here. But I think Jem is giving us a way to come together and work toward a sustainable future, or work for a livable, you know, a humane future, in spite of much great loss. and that's going to be interesting work, is for people to come to touch with, you know, and that's kind of the problem, is that, you know, when you blame people for it, then you point your finger at someone. But if it's just a hurricane that comes through, people just blame the hurricane and they're glad that they survived, and they don't lament the loss of their cars and stuff. They are just glad to be alive. But there's been this turning of that conversation to being, it's caused by President Trump not doing enough fast enough, or deregulating too much and stuff, when when the cause isn't the issue, it's the survival that counts. And so we need to bring people back to not having to take sides of who do you blame or what, but you know, because again, just like, you know, Audubon was responsible for shooting the last carbonated warbler. There was never seen one after he painted it and stuff, and passenger pigeons, and he was blasting them away. But at his time, they couldn't conceive that man could affect nature like that. Nature was so majestic. And most of us are still there. We just can't believe that man can do it. But by golly, we got to survive. And so if we can minimize the arguing and blame showing, and through Jem's work about how we can live with the losses, is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. I guess where I depart a bit is there's this kind of odd little gold nugget in the middle of the phrase imminent collapse of social systems that to me really, what I heard, this is from Jem's original paper, the one that went so viral, that if we continue to just not consider any form of collapse in our systems, then we literally are, you know, keeping our blinders on and keeping ourselves at arm's length from really authentically engaging with the web of life itself. You know, we're delusional. We're delusional to think that we can continue to have a fossil fuel driven, exponential growth driven, infinite growth on a finite planet. It just can't continue.
I agree.
And
I
so
totally agree.
there's the gold nugget in there, is that to the degree a person is brave enough to just touch that gold nugget for a second, the gold nugget is the possibility that there is another way for human beings to do this human operating system. Just to consider it is extraordinary, which we don't even get to consider it if we don't talk about it. So I think that's the thing I'm most thankful for. Excuse me. I'm most thankful for in just that turn of phrase that, or the couple of different phrases that that Professor Bendel's, you know, introduced. That, you know, first one being deep adaptation, like how we as human beings will choose to be with one another. What will be the qualities of our presence in the midst of the collapse of systems? And of course, the other one that I'm just mentioning is what he's seeing is imminent collapse of social systems that we have basically come to call normal. There's a brilliance to it, and there's a call to courage to just touch that there is a possibility.
Absolutely. There's
Of
a real
us
possibility.
finding another way of being on this planet together that is far beyond the day-to-day hard scrabble life that that I'm literally, my jaw's dropping when you're describing what you do on a daily basis in your work, and your dogged commitment to the quality of waterways, both riverine and ocean. Is staggering to me, what you do and what you face and the people you have to engage with and the multiple, often not very flattering motivations that various people have. It's extraordinary. And I hope for us all that more and more of us will touch that little golden possibility of, can we create another way of doing this thing? And can we do it so soon that it makes our heads spin? Because I don't see it otherwise. I guess I'll just show you my whole hand. I don't come anywhere near your level of optimism, and I so appreciate your optimism. We've got now 11 years to this supposed IPCC deadline of 50%, at least 50% reduction in our use of fossil fuels. And right now, I don't see people even engaging at the level of conversation is for the standard way of operating. Politics is so polarized and possibility is so hard to find that I'm banking on people as optimistic as yourself to get us through. It's an extraordinary time. And Rob, truthfully, I don't know how you do it. I am so glad you and your crew do what you do. I'm deeply thankful. And particularly, again, the other agencies that you're aligning with, the folks over at Scientists Warning, similarly, they're their dogged commitment to bring a level of truth-telling to activism. And of course, probably the greatest example of that now is either Greta Thunberg and the Friday strikes on the one hand, or Extinction Rebellion on the other. There is some truth-telling cracking through. So for that, I've got to say I am deeply, deeply grateful as well. Rob, I'm
And there are a
wondering if
lot of
there's...
cracks in the cement. There are a lot of cracks in the cement.
Yeah.
A lot of groups. We see them in America with the climate summit, and it's just fascinating to see all over the world these little lights coming on of people inspired by those and other issues. People really care about their places, and they're looking for ways to make a difference.
Yeah. Well, maybe you just did what I was about to ask you to do, which is to just kind of what message would you like to leave people with as we wrap up this conversation? Is you've just said a mouthful, and I'm just wondering, is there anything else that you'd like to say to folks?
Keep up the good work. I mean, it was just remarkable, the Extinction Rebellion, of people non-violently working so collaboratively with police people. I received, because I put out the news about that for Scientists Warning, and I got a letter back from a gentleman who claimed that he was on my side because he'd had a vasectomy, but he was really worried about his wife being able to get through Heathrow Airport for Easter, and those demonstrators better not mess up his wife's visit, And I wrote back and said, those are the youth going out there, and they're working with the authorities because they want their message heard. They don't want to disrupt people because that'll alienate them. They want the message to be heard. And so things are really bad, and yet we're not seeing collapse of society. We're seeing humans, social groups rising to a higher level. Those three people who glued themselves to a subway train, and peaceful, that was a real testimony. The writing that they did on the windows of Shell Oil Company was a clear statement. And God bless the Church of England. Their pension fund was so important to them because that they said that they got Shell Oil to, if they don't meet oil reductions, that the executives will take it out of their pay. And they had to do that so that the pension funds would stay invested in them, because they didn't want to invest in a company that would destroy the other companies when they're paying the pensioners 20 years from now.
Yes.
So, do something. Everyone's got to do something. And I don't know the answer to this one, but that makes it so much exciting. I mean, we are literally, surfing on the avalanche here, and and hang on to your loved ones, and keep your priorities straight, because there are going to be great losses ahead of us.
Yeah. Well, Rob Moir, it's a pleasure. Excuse me. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you and to get just a little sense of what you and your organization are doing and have been doing for so long. I thank you so much for your heart and your intention and your passion in what you're doing. And I'll look forward to hopefully checking in with you later in this year. Something tells me that we are going to be in an even more turbulent environment in this world, where media, politics, activism, and public policy overlap. I think we're just starting to see what sort of turbulence can occur in that intersection. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to set up a pre-book an appointment later in this year, so we can both let each other know what we see from our perspectives. Rob Moir, thanks so much for taking time with us.
You're very welcome. I look forward to working with you with Jem Bendel's Deep Adaptation as well. Thank you for your leadership there too.
You take good care, brother.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.